4, 5.
Hello and welcome to Joe and Kat Chats. Oh my goodness. Today we are talking about International Women's Day. We're recording this live on March 9th, 2021 on Facebook and YouTube at /JoeNiceDJ. As always, you can find us on socials at Joe and Kat Chats or on our personal pages at JoeNiceDJ and at CatWells22. We are also happy to be a part of Tastemakers Radio on Dash Radio. Listen every Wednesday at 11 a.m. Pacific and 2 p.m. Eastern. So as usual, I am very excited to get into our topic today. But first, I want to ask how you are and point out how cool your t-shirt is, just like every week.
Cat Wells, we first of all, I want to spend a special shout out to all the women because today's episode is about International Women's Day. We're doing this the day after the global celebration of International Women's Day. I want to pay my respects to you because obviously you're a woman.
Yeah, thank you.
You're very welcome. There's a few special women in my life that I'd like to highlight. Obviously my mom, because without my mom, hey, I'm not here. My little baby girl Parker, who's 10 years old, because hey, she's my little baby girl and she's going to grow up to be a woman one day. Her adopted sister Zamaya, because Zamaya is awesome and amazing and she's growing faster than I can possibly ever imagine. And my ex-wife. I mean, we didn't see eye to eye on a lot of things. That's obvious because she's an ex-wife, but she's a wonderful mother, and I'm never going to say anything bad about her at all. We just didn't work out, and that happens, and it happens. Your sister Joanna, I mean, absolutely special lady. Your mom Kim, she's awesome. So there's a lot of special women that I want to make sure we talk about today, in addition to the women that I've brought up in conversation with you. You asked me about my shirt. This shirt is part of the forthcoming group of t-shirts. Talked about the 4 fights. Let me remove this banner. Let me get that out of here. Where is it? I'm moving it. I promise you it's getting out of here. All right.
There we go. Okay.
There it is. Humanity, freedom, equality, and survival. These are the 4 fights. These t-shirts will be forthcoming soon. Wait for it. In addition, I went grocery shopping today and they were selling Justice for George Floyd pins. It's going to be difficult to see that with the light, but there it is right there. The Derek Chauvin trial began yesterday in Minneapolis, Minnesota.
Yeah.
Part of the reason why we began to do all of these conversations on a week-to-week basis is in a direct response to the Black Lives Matter movement and the injustices of, of police brutality and Black people, specifically Black men, being killed by white people, white police officers. We demand justice for the family of George Floyd. We demand justice for the families of Walter Wallace Jr. We demand justice for Rayshard Brooks. We still want justice for Breonna Taylor. We want justice for anybody that has been a victim of white supremacy, police genocide, and institutionalized racism.
Yes, absolutely. And thank you so much for saying all of that, because this is such an important point while we watch the trial happening in Minneapolis. It's also a topic we talked about in the very first episode, which we didn't know was going to be Joe and Kat Chats yet. We just talked about it. You had come up with these 4 fights and you started talking about them, and they inspired me. And I'm so happy that they're coming out on a t-shirt, because my very good friend, who I appreciate very much, sent me one. And guess what? I'm wearing it today too.
Oh, cheese and rice. Hey. Look at that. Showtime. Yes. We love it. We love it. So these are coming soon. Everybody's going to have an opportunity to get one. We're going to put them in gray like we have here on screen. We've got the white version and we're going to have a black version. The black version is going to have white lettering, and the white t-shirt has black lettering. The red dot's going to be the same. But
amazing.
We want to make sure that people understand that these four fights continue on. They've been continuing for hundreds, if not thousands of years for various people across Earth. And they're going to continue on after this pandemic is quote unquote over.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. No, it's something that we really like to highlight, and that's part of the inspiration of today's topic. Because I mean, last month in February, we talked about Black History Month, and we highlighted some people that we found inspiring that were a pivotal part of the civil rights movement. And that's sort of what inspired this topic today too, is I just wanted to highlight some people that are more international, some people that are women, and some people that are maybe non-binary or non-gender conforming, because they're important as well, and they should be celebrated as well, just like we did yesterday for International Women's Day.
Absolutely.
So
real quick, before we continue, how are you doing? How's life treating you?
Things are good. Yeah, the sun's out today. I went for a walk with the dog this morning. I cannot complain.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. I know we have a lot of people to get to, and we have a limited time to get to as many people as possible. As people can see on the ticker down below, it is Joe and Cat Chats. It is episode number 39 of the historic Joe and Cat Chat series. It is International Women's Day. We are celebrating International Women's Day today. And as you so eloquently said, Kat, it is going to be just that, international. And as you can see here, I've got my passports. We're flying today. I've got my British passport here, got the US passport here. All right. I've got the passport holder in effect. And look what it even says right there. It says, Mr. Nice. That
Amazing.
is how we're dealing with it. I can't tell you who got me that, but I think you might know who that person is. But in any event, I want to start off with a brief history of International Women's Day, because I think it's important to know the roots of International Women's Day, so we know which way we're going to go. And International Women's Day has its roots in Germany. A lady named Clara Zetkin, who was born on July 5, 1857. She was a Marxist theorist, a communist, an activist, and a women's rights activist. Now, she was also active in the German Social Democratic Party. Later in life, she was involved in several other left-leaning political parties. Now, she also became involved in politics in the 1880s, but you can imagine how patriarchal the political scene in Germany was in the 1880s. So she was exiled to Switzerland and then France. Later on, she returned to Germany years later and became the editor of the Social Democratic Party's newspaper for women. The name of this paper is called Die Gleichheit, which is German for equality. And she held that position for the next 25 years. Now, Zetkin got more involved with the women's movement and the labor movements in 1874. And as she became more involved with women's politics, she also became involved with equal rights and the rights for suffrage. Now, in addition to her role as being the chief editor of the Equality newspaper in Germany, she helped to organize the first women's conference in the world. Now, this event took place in Copenhagen, Denmark. And if you ever get a chance to go to Copenhagen, Denmark, and it's a magnificent city. I've been there a handful of times. It's awesome. And this event that took place in Copenhagen, Denmark in 1910 was called the International Women's Conference. Now, the idea behind this conference was to support equal rights for women, which makes total sense. Now, the following year, on March 19th, 1911, so in about a little more than 10 days, it'll be 120 years since the first day of International Women's Day. International Women's Day happened on March 19, 1911. And over 1 million people attended across various countries in Europe. Clara Zetkin remains a wildly popular figure in German history. There's plenty of cities that are named, so not cities, but streets in plenty of cities in Germany that are named after Clara Zetkin. Now, every year since 1996, the United Nations has adopted themes for International Women's Day. This year, the theme is Women in Leadership. Achieving a Future in a COVID-19 World. So when we talk about so many events that take place around the world, there seems to be a North American bias to the creation of many of these events. And what we want to do is set the record straight and make sure that that International Women's Day didn't start up at some advertising firm on Madison Avenue in New York City, or it didn't start off at some casting studio in Culver City, California, just outside of Los Angeles. This started in Germany. This started as a labor-focused movement. This started as a socialist movement. And this started as a woman-focused movement.
Mm-hmm. Amazing. And I think that that's really, highlights something that we try to focus on. It's something that I really admire a lot in the people that I sort of decided to talk about in today's episode, which, I mean, of course, when we talk about people, it's hard to narrow it down. There's always so many amazing people that are that come to mind. But yeah, I think that the theme that sort of emerged through my research into all of these incredible women that I'm going to talk about and you're going to talk about is that they're part of these movements for rights, whether in some way that has to do with women and gender liberation and equality and equity too.
Absolutely. And we want to make sure that we understand that equality and equity go hand in hand, but they are not the same. Equality and equity are not the same. Equity is making sure that everybody has equal representation. Equality means that everybody gets the same things regardless of context of the particular situation. So It's entirely possible to have, and we're going to cover this again in another episode of Joe and Kat Chats in the Vocabulary of Politics, but equity is more useful than equality because just because you give everybody the same things, it doesn't necessarily have the same sort of impact simply by giving everybody the same situations or same access or the same material resources. Yes. Equity is what matters most. So when we talk about healthcare access or health equity, there are some people who are going to have greater opportunities for healthcare. So you can't just give everybody the same access to healthcare, especially when there are people who don't have access at all. What you want to do is make sure that everybody gets equal treatment through a lens of context given the particular life situation.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, I couldn't have said it any better. That was amazing. Thank you so much for clarifying.
Kat, every once in a while I get it right. Every once in a while, a stop clock is right twice a day. A blind squirrel finds an acorn in the woods every once in a while, and once in a blue moon, or I'll get it right.
It's a lot more than that, but I guess we'll go with that for now.
I appreciate the kind words. Thank you very much.
Yeah, so I think to start off, I think we should keep with sort of the women's rights movement, and I want to talk about someone who is still very young and became an activist very, very young because of the circumstances she found herself in, and that is Malala. I think that most people would have heard of Malala by now. Her full name is Malala Yousafzai. Yes. Mm-hmm. She was an activist for girls' right to education from a really young age. I think her first speech was when she was 11. She was nominated for the Children's Peace Prize in 2011, and going against the Taliban rule in the region of Swat Valley in Pakistan. Malala was shot in the head by the Taliban on her way from school in 2012, and she was only 15 years old. So she has since continued advocating for girls' right to education and become the youngest person to receive the Nobel Peace Prize, which was in 2014. I have two quotes actually from Malala. One is, "If one man can destroy everything, why can't one girl change it?"
Oh, read that again, please.
Yeah. If one man can destroy everything, why can't one girl change it?
Brilliant. Brilliant.
Yeah.
Totally agree.
So I wanted to include Malala because she really inspires me, because she uses her privilege that she had to give voice to the voiceless. She advocates for something that should be a given, but those of us in the West can really take education for granted. And she continues to use her fame to advocate for women and girls' right to education even to this day. She's living in the UK right now. Now, the other quote that I found was just so inspiring was, because her fight is for education for women and girls, she says, quote, "One child, one teacher, one book, one pen can change the world."
Read that again. Read that again. Read that again.
She's right.
Because I want to make sure I digest and absorb everything that you're talking about today. Please.
So she says, "One child, one teacher, one book, one pen can change the world."
Wow.
I know.
Wow. What's interesting, while you were talking, I was listening. I always pay attention. And I remember this time last year, I was traveling the world, playing shows and doing what I do. And one of the stops that I had along the way was in Istanbul, Turkey. And I spent quite a bit of time on the Asian side of Istanbul, Turkey, in an area known as Kadıköy. You take the ferry across, that's the first stop. And I got to hang out in Kadıköy with some of my friends over there. And while I was there, I hope everybody can see this. This is on my Instagram right now. This is a massive mural of Malala in Istanbul, Turkey.
Beautiful.
A massive mural of Malala in Istanbul, Turkey. And this was taken on March 12th, 2020. And the quote that you just now, if you can take a look and see, there are some words in Turkish that are there. The quote that she says along the hijab, it says, "One kid, one teacher, one book, and a pencil can change the world." Those words that you see there is exactly the quote that you just read. And
it inspires a generation. It inspires so many.
Absolutely. And then there is a hashtag underneath of it, and it's kind of difficult to see. I won't bother showing it to you. And the word is Kızlara sever. My Turkish is not very good. But that hashtag, what it means is give voice to girls.
Yeah.
So just wanted to share that with the world because, again, today's effort, today's show, today's broadcast, today's podcast is international. And there it is. We're talking about it. We're showing it to you. We've already gone to Germany. We talked, Malala is Saudi Arabian, you said it?
Pakistan.
Pakistani, that's right, Pakistan. My gosh, it's so Pakistani. There's a mural of her in Istanbul, Turkey. And that was just one mural in one city. There's probably dozens or hundreds or maybe thousands of murals of her around the world because she is an inspirational figure.
Absolutely.
She is an inspirational figure. Another inspirational figure that I wanted to go ahead and discuss, and we're going to take it to the United States now. We're going to be back on quote-unquote home soil. It's none other than Angela Davis.
Oh, of course. Amazing.
Angela Davis was born January 26, 1944. She is an activist. She is a philosopher. She is a professor and an author. Now, Angela Davis was born in segregated Birmingham, Alabama. She earned a PhD in philosophy from Humboldt University in one of my favorite cities in the world, Berlin, Germany. Now, when she returned to the United States, she joined the Communist Party, and she was also involved with the feminist movement and the anti-Vietnam War movements and demonstrations. Now, in 1969, she was working at UCLA as a philosophy professor. The UCLA Board of Regents fired her due to her connections with the Communist Party. Now, the California courts deemed that the firing was illegal, so they rehired her. Then they fired her again because of her overly charged language and rhetoric. Seems a rather strange way to fire a professor, especially a distinguished professor, but that's what happened. Now, in the following year, there were three men there were three brothers, and the names of these brothers escapes me. I can't remember the names of the brothers, but they were involved in an armed takeover of a courthouse in Marin County, California. The guns that were used in this takeover belonged to Angela Davis. 4 people were killed in the courthouse. And Angela Davis was held in jail for a year before the charges were dropped. After that, Angela Davis visited several Eastern Bloc countries in the 70s and 80s to learn more about the communist movement in Eastern Europe, most specifically in Poland, Hungary, and an area of the world that I'm quite fond of, the former Yugoslavia. And it was Yugoslavia back then. Now, a couple of times, Angela Davis was the Communist Party's vice presidential candidate in the United States. In 1997, Angela Davis founded an organization called the Critical Resistance, and the Critical Resistance is devoted to abolishing the prison industrial complex, and that is something you and I, Cat Wells, has spoken about on several occasions. Now, since Dr. Davis retired, she has been involved in the Occupy movement. She has also been involved in the BDS movement. The BDS movement is an acronym that stands for Boycott, Divest, and Sanction. And this is involving the conflict between Israel and Palestine and Israel's continued occupation of Palestine. And she is a firm believer, as am I, that Israel should face boycotts, divestment, and sanctions for the continued illegal occupation of Palestine, the Gaza Strip, and Gaza Strip, the West Bank, and the Golan Heights. Now,
absolutely.
Additionally, Angela Davis visited Cuba, another communist country, and she said that Cuba was a racism-free country. And she believed that socialism is the vehicle needed to end racism in the United States of America. I can understand that, and I'll add a little bit more to that after I say this. Now, Dr. Davis has written over about a dozen books. Her most important book is a book called Women, Race, and Class. And one of these days, you and I will eventually do a book episode. And I guarantee you that book will be mentioned in the dozen or so or 30 books that we're going to talk about in an episode. And Women, Race, and Class looked at gender, race, and class through a Marxist feminist lens. And that is incredibly important because in that book, she talks about how women routinely get exploited as a labor source. And in the book, she talks about making sure that women get equality and women get paid just as much as men. And women don't have to fit into these particular gender roles simply because they are women. So because they are women, they don't necessarily have to be nurses. Women can be doctors. Because women aren't necessarily, come on, another example, automobile mechanics. Women can be automobile mechanics. Just because these roles are typically occupied by men, it doesn't prohibit and restrict women from taking those jobs on also. And essentially, women can do anything that a man can do.
Yeah. I mean, talk about intersectionality before it was coined. Yeah, I mean, that's exactly what many of those books are describing without having, like, you know, that term hadn't been outlined necessarily yet by Kimberly Crenshaw. But such a useful thing to look at the intersections of you know, race, class, gender, disability, you know, all of the things that make up your
education,
your identity, your education. Exactly. Yeah, exactly.
Education.
So,
and real quick, before we continue, something that she said that was rather interesting. She said she visited Cuba and said that Cuba was a racism-free country. And she also said that socialism was the key to abolishing racism in the United States. I can understand where she's coming from with that completely, because there have been the countries that I feel most comfortable, where I feel there is less racism or no racism at all, are countries that at minimum have had a communist and or a socialist past. and I've said this ad nauseum, the place in the world where I feel the most safe and most free to be myself is the former Yugoslavia. And they were a former communist and former socialist country. And now it's now 7 countries. There are plenty of times when I walk the streets of Ljubljana, Slovenia, or Zagreb, Croatia, or Sarajevo, Bosnia, or Skopje, North Macedonia, or Prizren, Kosovo, or Pula, Croatia, wherever. And I feel as if I don't have to worry about a police officer looking to do some harm to me. I don't have to worry about a bunch of people with head tattoos that are white and bald that may be part of a right-wing militia looking to attack me or harm me. I don't have to worry about that. And when she says that, she not only, I think, means that because socialism and communism eliminate inequalities based on economics.
Mm-hmm.
And something that I've said on many occasions, I've said that racism is a function of economics. So if you make sure that everybody is on a level economic playing field and you make sure that everybody has the same stuff, there's a better than good chance that you're going to reduce and ultimately eliminate racism. Because the economic impetus for being greedy and having more than somebody else and subjugating somebody else to a permanent underclass based upon biological irrelevance makes all the sense in the world.
Yeah, I love the way you sort of broke that down and articulated that point, because that's totally what happens when you have socialized. Like, for example, like we have sort of socialized healthcare here. And so it becomes sort of this innate thing where you don't really think about healthcare as a challenge. You just kind of go to the doctor when you need to go to the doctor because it's available to you. And there's less barriers. I mean, there are issues, of course, here in Canada with our healthcare system. But that's a conversation for another day.
By the way, we have some comments in the chat. I want to get to these right now. My guy Nigel saying, when are you getting to Jamaica? Hopefully later today. I'd like to travel to Jamaica. I'd like to visit, Maubay. Maybe hang out at Flankers. He would know what I'm talking about. That's some next level stuff. Cool. Asher is in Israel right now saying, After Joe and Kat for keeping this going strong. It's about time that equality with men and women become globalized. I am happy to say that while I was in the IDF is an acronym standing for Israeli Defense Force, I served with some badass females out here in Israel. Salute to you, Mr. Nadler. We appreciate your contribution. And yes, there's plenty of wonderful Israeli women. I mean, Golda Meir was Israeli, if I'm not mistaken. So we're going to get to a lot more people because we're already at 28 minutes into the show.
Oh my gosh. Time is moving so quickly, as it always does, because we always have such interesting, things to talk about.
We dissect and absorb. Dissect and absorb on every level. Yeah. You know it and I know it.
Absolutely. So one person, when you were talking about Angela Davis, one person that came to mind that I wanted to talk about today is Dr. Vandana Shiva.
Ooh, okay.
So she was trained as a physicist and has a doctorate in philosophy. Now, her activism is sort of with the ecofeminism strain of things. So sort of within that, women in feminism line of thinking that Angela Davis was so entrenched in, ecofeminism uses an intersectional lens and highlights the relationship between women and the environment as fundamentally entwined through their oppression. And so ecofeminism advocates against the patriarchal ideology that dominates and exploits both women and nature. So an example of this is like extraction industries that hurt like Mother Earth and impact women of color disproportionately. And so that intersection and intertwinedness of, our climate and the world around us, and women and the oppression of women is so, so intertwined. Now, I mean, I love gardening. I love agriculture. I love permaculture. And so part of Dr. Vandana Shiva's, campaigns against GMOs and intellectual property rights and free trade is seed freedom, which is the rejection of corporate patents on seeds. Dr. Shiva condemns the practice of patenting life forms such as basmati rice and neem, which are two battles she fought and won against corporations and the U.S. Department of Agriculture, which is a big organization.
Huge.
And also, she does biodiversity activism. So she's against homogenization of crops through monocultural farming, because the implications of becoming reliant on corporations for seed, along with pesticides and fertilizers, which are usually made from petrochemicals. And so really, I wanted to include her because she has fought for ecological justice against many corporations and governments that prioritize profit over people. So her work is literally what keeps people alive by protecting our rights to food, agriculture, and subsistence.
Interesting. It's interesting how you bring up the ecofeminist aspect of Dr. Shiva's work, because a couple of months back, we did an episode on language. And we threw out a bunch of linguistic terms. Go ahead and listen to that or watch that episode if you want to learn more about what we talked about that day. But one of the terms that we did not discuss is the word connotation. And it's when you attribute a particular aspect or a particular characteristic to another object where the characteristic is not necessarily attributed to. And there's another linguistic term that we wanted to discuss called a collocation. And a collocation is when you have two words that are frequently used in conjunction. So you'll have, for example, government intelligence. I mean, that's a bit of a misnomer, but they're typically linked together. Peanut butter and jelly linked together. Another collocation that we consistently hear in our day-to-day conversation is the phrase Mother Earth.
Or Mother Nature.
And that was the next one I was going to, Kat. Yeah. Mother Nature. And
I knew you were going to pick up on that.
Yeah. And when you think about the ecofeminist lens that Dr. Shiva's work is focused on, it not only makes complete sense, but it is also appropriate. Because everything that comes from the earth is similar to a birthing process. A man cannot give birth. Only a woman can give birth. And when you talk about the creation and growth, there is not only nature, as in Mother Nature, but then there is the B side of that record, nurturing. And from a purely physiological perspective, men are just not necessarily or biologically capable of nurturing. That's not something that's in us per se. I think men have to be taught how to nurture. But from my understanding, women, it's a part of motherhood, if that makes any sense. And I don't want to sound or like I'm walking down the wrong road here, but I know what I'm trying to get at and I know what I'm trying to say. It might not sound the best way, but what I'm saying is when you talk about nature and nurturing, that those characteristics feel more motherly. That makes sense? And it makes sense that from an ecofeminist lens and saving the earth, that it's focused through a lens of a woman rather than a man, and through, quite honestly, a motherhood perspective rather than a fatherhood perspective.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure if I agree with you in the sense that men have to learn or don't have sort of any innate ability or whatever to nurture. But that's a debate we can get into another day. But I understand what you mean when you're sort of bringing these things together, because I think the focus that I think is most important here is just sort of the draw between oppressions, because
Yes.
I mean, I'm a climate crisis activist. Like I am an environmentalist, and I think that reading Dr. Vandana Shiva's work in sort of early in my environmentalism training, or like whatever, when I was interested in becoming an activist, I think that really grounded it for me, and it made me go, oh yeah, like the oppression is what is the same, because extraction of resources is how we make money. That's what drives economies, traditionally and still today. And so the oppression of women, and sort of the oppression of nature and the domination of both of those things together, it makes them innately tied too.
Sure. Of course.
So I think that's like part of what you're getting at too, with ecofeminism draws those things together in
Yes.
sort of an easy to understand way.
Yes, and I'm not saying that men can't nurture. That's not. I want to make sure that I'm clear with this.
Okay.
But yeah. I think when with understanding motherhood and birth, and understanding what birth actually is, and again, I've seen a live birth. I was in the room when Parker was born. There's a biological and physical connection that takes place with birth that lends itself to nurturing through a mother easier than it would be through a father, simply because of that physical bond and connection. Does that make a bit more sense?
Yeah, I mean, the biological part is just sort of where I take a little issue, but yeah, I definitely understand what you mean, and yeah, I think there is something to be said about, the physiological things that happen to a woman when she gives birth, and
yes.
Those things are absolutely real. And I mean, there's a lot going on there. There's hormones and all sorts of biological mechanisms and stuff that really bond you to the child that you were growing for almost 10 months in your belly.
Exactly. Another activist we want to talk about is Loujain Al-Hathloul. I'm going to say her name again. Loujain Al-Hathloul. I've never heard of her. Joe, what? Look, we're going international with this. This is real. She was born on July 31, 1989. She has a degree from a school that you might be familiar with, the University of British Columbia.
Nice.
Mm-hmm. She's a Saudi Arabian activist and political prisoner. Now, Loujain has been arrested many times for defying the ban against women driving in Saudi Arabia. In 2018, she was arrested and charged with destabilizing the Saudi kingdom. To give you an idea of how repressive and oppressive Saudi Arabia's government is, the Saudi government kidnapped Loujain from the United Arab Emirates. I'm going to say that again. The Saudi government kidnapped Loujain Al-Hathloul from the United Arab Emirates. Her first arrest happened on December 1, 2014. She was held in prison for 73 days after attempting to cross the border in her car. She has a driver's license from the United Arab Emirates. Al-Hathloul tried to vote and to be a candidate in the 2015 elections and was barred from doing so. In 2018, Loujain was kidnapped again from the United Arab Emirates and deported to Saudi Arabia and placed under a travel ban. In June of 2018, women were finally given the rights and freedoms to drive. But Loujain and her 4 activist friends who decided to take on this fight with her remained in police custody, and she was subsequently tortured. Some of the torture methods that she suffered were beating of the feet, electrical shocks, and waterboarding. Now, for a while, It is disgusting. For a while, Liu Jane was not heard from and not allowed to communicate with the outside world. And she was not allowed to communicate, but her 4 other activist friends were allowed to communicate with the outside world. As a result, Liu Jane decided to go on a hunger strike for 6 days in protest. Now, in September and October of 2020, so we're talking 6 months ago, dozens of countries called on Saudi Arabia to release Liu Jane and her 4 activist friends who were put behind bars for indefinitely. They weren't charged with anything. They were just put behind bars. Now, in October of 2020, Liu Jane went on another hunger strike for 7 days in protest of the way she was being treated in comparison to her other 4 activists. She was being treated more harshly than her other 4 activist friends. On December 28, 2020, so a little more than a couple of months ago, Liu Jane was sentenced to 5 years and 8 months in prison. Afterwards, after her sentencing, several European Union special envoys demanded her release. On February 10, 2021, so essentially a month ago, Liu Jane al-Hathloul was released from prison. She was released from prison.
Wow. Okay.
She's out. There's more. She was nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize in 2019 and in 2020. She was also nominated for the 2020 Václav Havel Human Rights Prize. And the winner of that prize will be announced in about a month on April 16, 2021. Now, I mentioned a name in that conversation, Václav Havel. And you're like, wait a minute, Joe, I've heard that name does sound somewhat familiar. Václav Havel is the former president of Czechoslovakia. Then when Czechoslovakia broke up into 2 countries on New Year's Day 1993, it became the Czech Republic and Slovakia. Václav Havel also became the first president of the Czech Republic. Václav Havel is unquestionably one of the most important Europeans in European history. He's a noted playwright. He is a noted politician and activist. The airport in Prague, Czech Republic is named the Václav Havel International Airport. It is named after Václav Havel. And the Human Rights Prize that Liu Jane al-Hathloul is nominated for is named after him.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yes. So I think it's important. So when we talked about, in last week's episode, we talked about the United States and the murder of, and the Saudis' murder of Jamal Khashoggi.
Yeah.
And they murdered the Mohammed bin Salman, and his security detail murdered Jamal Khashoggi because Jamal Khashoggi spoke out against the Saudi Arabian government and the Saudi Arabian regime. And he was murdered. Quite honestly, given what we know about how patriarchal and repressive Saudi Arabia's government is, Liu Jane al-Hathloul and her 4 female activist friends, quite honestly, at least in my opinion, are lucky to be alive.
Yeah.
Because if they can murder a journalist for merely speaking out against the Saudi Arabian government, and that was a man that they did this to, think about how Saudi Arabia views women and they were arrested for merely wanting to drive, for merely wanting to be independent.
Yeah.
It's shocking.
It is shocking. Yeah, I think it's something to be said. We talked about Khashoggi last week, and if those of you who like to listen to Joe and Cat Chats regularly, we're going to be talking about him again next week, so stay tuned for that.
Absolutely.
Because we're talking about whistleblowers, which will be a really interesting episode. In that sense, I think someone that I wanted to speak about as well fits into this discussion because this person is from Yemen, and this is a country that is now facing genocide because of the Saudi Arabian government.
Yes.
So Tawakkul Karman, also known as the Mother of the Revolution, is an advocate who works for the non-violent struggle for safety of women's of women's rights to full participation in peace building in Yemen. So she's a journalist by trade and an organizer that responded to political instability and human rights abuses in Yemen by mobilizing and reporting these injustices.
Sure.
So she has been imprisoned a number of times for her pro-democracy, pro-human rights protests. So similar, this region of the world, and she's also known for her the nonviolent protests. She does a lot of like sit-in movements in public squares, and she's still doing that today. She was a key figure in advocating for the Arab Spring as well. And the reason why I wanted to talk about her partially is because she won the 2011 Peace Prize together with two other women that I want to talk about. But do you have anything to add?
No. Keep going. You're on fire.
Okay, yeah. So there were two other women that were involved with the 2011 Peace Prize. Both of these women are from Liberia. So Lema Gbowie, I'm not sure how to say her name. My apologies. My settler colonial vernacular is lacking. But she is known for leading a nonviolent movement that brought together Christian and Muslim women to end Liberia's devastating civil war in 2003, which was a long-standing 14-year civil war, and it was very brutal, if you know anything about it. So the demonstration she led was the pivotal moment in ending the war, resulting in a signed peace treaty, which is a big, big deal. Her movement paved the way for the election of the first female president of Africa, who's someone I want to talk about next. Her name is Ellen Johnson Sterlief.
That's right.
So Ellen Johnson Sterlief is known as Africa's Iron Lady. She's a leading promoter of peace, justice, and democratic rule. She was elected president in Liberia in 2005, which is 2 years after the Civil War ended. And while she was not always a good leader or head of state, many of people did not like her very much. What she did do for the country was keep the peace, so another civil war did not break out during her tenure.
Right.
So these women are worth mentioning, I think, because while they're all great, they all greatly contributed to the fight for women's rights and had successes and continue to fight throughout their lives. I also think it's important to just highlight where they may have fallen short, because Sterlief was criticized a lot for the way she led the country, and just because she broke the glass ceiling, there's still more work to do. Whereas Gbowie and Carmen demonstrated that working to educate and support women goes further sometimes than being in a place of power within government. So.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I know Ellen Johnson Sirleaf, she was educated in the United States. I think she has a master's degree in public policy from the Kennedy School of Government at Harvard University, if I'm not mistaken. So she does have some connections here in the United States. It's good that we've highlighted 3 women from Africa. We spent quite a bit of time in Asia. We covered Germany. We went to the United States. I've got my passport again. All right, we're moving again.
Where are we going next?
We're going to India.
Oh.
We're going to India, and we're going to talk about the environment. We're going to talk about Disha Rabi. Disha Rabi is a 23-year-old climate activist and founder of Fridays for Future in India. And she is from Bangalore, India. Now, little less than a month ago, Disha Rabi was arrested on February 13, 2021 for an alleged involvement for spreading an online kit in support of the farmers' strikes in India. The creator of this online kit is a person we're probably going to talk about after I'm done speaking about Disha Rabi, Greta Thunberg, who is the creator of Fridays for Future.
Mm-hmm.
Now, in addition to Fridays for Future in India, Rabi is also responsible for MAPA, M-A-P-A, which is an acronym called Most Affected People and Areas. Once again, Most Affected People and Areas. Now, Ravi got involved with climate activism because her grandparents are farmers. And she, Ravi, and her grandparents and her parents have witnessed the harmful effects of the climate disaster and ecocide.
Yeah.
Now, in September 2020, Ravi went on strike with the farmers because the farmers are the people living through this climate crisis. Heavier than normal rains led to large floods that washed away many homes, including her home, and damaged thousands of acres of crops. Now, her social media accounts frequently are monitored by the Indian government. And when she was arrested, one of the charges, as she described them, were colonial era sedition laws. Now, the reason she was charged with this is because of this toolkit that was passed about online. And there was information in the toolkit that was designed to spread awareness to the farmers' struggle and the farmers' strike that is ongoing right now. And supposedly, sharing information to support striking farmers so they can have benefits and a living wage is an act of treason, according to the Indian government. So when she was arrested, loads of Indian professors and celebrities released statements in support of Disha Ravi. A couple of weeks ago, on February 23, 2021, Disha Ravi received bail and was released from jail. What we're seeing a lot so far is, you talked about the doctor who was involved with ecofeminism.
Dr. Vandana Shiva,
That's Dr. Vandana Shiva. I just mentioned Disha Ravi, who is another female climate activist.
Mm-hmm.
I think the next person we should discuss is another female climate activist.
Yeah, absolutely. And I actually have a quote that I didn't read by Dr. Vandana Shiva that really goes together with what you were just talking about with Riva. So climate change is not just a problem for the future. It is impacting us every day, everywhere. Those least responsible for climate change are worst affected by it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. We got a couple of comments in the chat, by the way, here. Out to Minman Rant saying, hello, friends.
Hello.
And he's saying, important topic. We will be on Ranch's podcast tonight, Real Fear and Loving, later tonight. We got a lively chat going on for that one. More on that later. We got about 7 minutes left.
Oh my gosh.
Yes. Who are we talking about next, Kat?
We got to talk about Greta Thunberg.
Mm-hmm.
So
yes.
Greta Thunberg started a global movement for youth to fight climate change through strategic school strikes every Friday.
Yes.
She began skipping school every Friday to protest the lack of climate actions at the parliament in her hometown in Sweden. The movement is now called Fridays for Future, which you mentioned.
Yes.
So it's become an ongoing global movement for youth and everyone else alike to hold their governments accountable for their lack of action about the climate crisis. On September 20th, 2019, she marched with millions of protesters at the New York City climate strike, which is known now and still remains the largest climate protest in history, as more than 4 million people marched that day across the world.
Wow.
The next day, she spoke to leaders and lawmakers at the UN Climate Summit. And this is where she now famously said, quote, "People are suffering. People are dying. Entire ecosystems are collapsing. We are in the beginning of a mass extinction.
Mm-hmm.
And all you can talk about is money and fairy tales of eternal economic growth. How dare you?" When I first heard that, it brought me to tears because of how powerful it is.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, we don't have much time left, but I don't want to talk about Greta Thunberg without talking about Autumn Peltier, who is a water justice activist.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So she began her fight as a young girl for the right for accessible, clean water for First Nations, Indigenous communities, and people across the world. She is a water protector that has spoken at many world events. She's from the Wik-Wamikong First Nation here in what is known as Canada on Turnbull Island. And apologies again for my settler colonial accent. So in 2019, she was appointed as the Anishinaabe Nation Chief Water Commissioner, which is a great honor for someone so young.
Yes.
She was also nominated for the Children's Peace Prize in 2019.
Yes.
And I have a quote from her as well. She says, quote, "Nothing can live without water. If we don't act now, there will come a time when we will be fighting for those last barrels of water. Once that is gone, we can't eat or drink money or oil. What will you do?" End quote.
Yeah, Kat, it's interesting how we've the last two women that you spoke about. And then you mentioned Malala Yousafzai earlier on, and you mentioned her quote about if men can destroy, something along the lines, if a man can destroy the world, how a woman can change it or a girl can change it. Okay. Greta Thunberg is all of 18 years old.
Yeah.
Autumn Peltier is 16.
Yeah.
She's 16 years old.
Malala's only 23.
I was just going to say, Malala's only 23. She's only 23. Gosh, I mean, some of the other women I mentioned. Oh my gosh, my mind just went blank. I swear to you, it just went blank. Disha Rabi, she's 23.
Okay.
So we're talking about some of these activists they're young women. These are young women that we're talking about. And in a couple of instances, girls, young girls that are using their platform to fight for something that is bigger than them.
Yeah.
And then, if we rewind the tape to the beginning of this conversation, I talked about the 4 fights: humanity, freedom, equality, and survival. And everything that we've outlined with the women that we've spoken about today fits into all of these nouns. It fits into all of them because it is a fight for humanity. We're fighting for water. You can't live without water. You can't live without water. If conflict happens because of resource acquisition and greed, someone's freedom is being taken away.
Yeah.
If there's some people that have access to resources and others that don't, that's an unequal situation. That's inequality. We're fighting for equality to make sure everybody gets everything. And with the ecological situation and the ecocide that's taking place, if we don't do something about the environment or women's rights or human rights, that's a fight for survival in the most literal and figurative senses of the word. So I know we are impossibly short on time. We have about 90 seconds left. I don't even know if we can get to another person because you probably have a couple of more people I wanted to get to. But I did want to at least mention Lamis Ben Saad. She is a Libyan activist. She's trying to help rebuild Tripoli, Libya. That's massively important. I also wanted to mention Maria Rabkova. She is a human rights defender and activist in Minsk, Belarus, and she is part of the protest movements against the Belarusian longtime leader, Alexander Lukashenko. And I'm sure there may be a couple of other people that you'd like to mention in the 60 seconds or so that we have left.
Yeah, I will mention Alexia Salvador, who's a Brazilian trans and gay rights activist, a school teacher, mother, pastor, and LGBTQ activist in Latin America. She calls her the first transgendered shepherd of Latin America, which is very cool. Janaea Future Khan is a Canadian co-founder of Black Lives Matter Toronto. Just the most inspiring person I've ever found on the internet. So please look them up.
Awesome.
And Cyrus Marcus Ware is a Canadian artist, abolitionist, activist, and LGBTQ activist.
Awesome.
Oh my goodness. They're just incredible. Please look all of these people up. I wish we had more time, but as always,
more time too.
Thank you so much, Joe.
You're very welcome as well.
Yeah, and thank you everyone for listening to this episode. We do this because we care about each and every one of you. So take care of yourself and those around you.
Absolutely.
Fight for those 4 fights. Please like and share and subscribe on all our socials as well at Joe and Kat Chats. So you take care of yourself.
You
Bye.
Too. All right, I'm going to stop the broadcast now. We